There is a specific kind of story that the world never quite gets tired of. The kind where one of Hollywood's most confirmed bachelors, a man who had publicly sworn off marriage not once but twice, quietly disappears from the headlines for a few months, and then resurfaces, engaged, transformed, and by all accounts, genuinely in love. That is exactly what happened when George Clooney met Amal Alamuddin. She was not a movie star. She was not a pop icon. She was a Lebanese, British human rights lawyer who had built her career in courtrooms defending the wrongfully accused and the politically persecuted. And somehow, she became the woman who did what no one in Hollywood believed was possible. She made George Clooney say yes. But who is she really beyond the headlines? And where is she now, more than a decade after the world first learned her name? To understand why this story captivated so many people, you have to understand what George Clooney represented in American culture. By the time he entered his 50s, he was not merely a famous actor. He was an institution. He had risen to global recognition through his role as Dr. Doug Ross on the television series ER in the 1990s, before transitioning into one of the most successful film careers of his generation. Movies like Out of Sight, the Ocean's Trilogy, Michael Clayton, and Up in the Air cemented him as both a box office draw and a critically respected performer. He won 10 Academy Awards. He directed films. He became a political activist and a philanthropist. He co-founded a tequila brand that later sold for nearly $1 billion. But beyond the professional Amal Clooney had cultivated a very specific public image. He was charming, witty, and deeply private about his personal life, while somehow remaining completely accessible as a celebrity. After his first marriage to actress Talia Balsam ended in divorce in 1993, he made a very public declaration. He said he would never marry again. He said it clearly, repeatedly, and with what appeared to be total conviction, and the media believed him. Fans believed him. For over 20 years, he dated actresses and models, and each relationship eventually ended relation hit. Without any real surprise, George Clooney was the perpetual bachelor, the man who had everything and needed nothing else. That was the story the world had agreed upon. Then came Amal. Amal Alamuddin was born in Beirut, Lebanon in 1978. Her family relocated to England when she was a child, and she went on to study law at Oxford and then at New York University. She built a career at one of London's most prestigious law firms, Doughty Street Chambers, where she took on cases that most lawyers would find intimidating at best and dangerous at worst. She represented former Ukrainian Prime Minister Yulia Tymoshenko. She worked on cases involving WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. She advocated for the recognition of the Armenian genocide at the European Court of Human Rights. This was not someone whose life revolved around celebrity culture. She operated in an entirely different world. The two met in 2013 at Clooney's villa on Lake Como in Italy. It was a mutual friend who made the introduction, and by most accounts, the connection was immediate. They began exchanging emails, then phone calls. Clooney later said in interviews that he knew she was extraordinary from the very first conversation. What struck him, he explained, was not just her intelligence, but the fact that she genuinely did not care about his fame. She had her own work, her own identity, and her own sense of purpose. She was not trying to enter his world. She was already fully living in her own. For someone like Clooney, who had spent decades navigating relationships where the power dynamic of fame was always present, this was something different, something quieter, and perhaps something more real. When their relationship became public in late 2013, the media response was immediate and enormous. Entertainment outlets around the world ran breathless headlines. Tabloids tried to find angles of conflict or instability. Columnists debated whether the relationship would last. Some coverage was respectful and genuinely curious. Other coverage was less so. A portion of the commentary focused on the cultural dimension of the relationship. Amal is of Lebanese and Arab heritage, a Muslim background, and a woman whose professional work placed her at the center of some of the world's most politically charged conversations. In some circles, this was framed as exotic or unusual, which revealed more about media bias than it did about the couple themselves. In other circles, particularly among Lebanese and Arab communities globally, there was quiet pride. A Lebanese woman had walked into one of the most fame-saturated environments on Earth and simply been herself, and it had been enough. Among the general public, the reaction was largely warm. There was something genuinely refreshing about the idea that Clooney had not fallen for another actress or model, but had found himself drawn to someone whose daily work involved fighting for human rights in international courts. It shifted the narrative. Suddenly, the story was not just about a celebrity couple. It was about two accomplished people finding each other at a point in their lives when both had every reason to stay exactly as they were. George Clooney and Amal Alamuddin were engaged in April 2014, after roughly 6 months of dating. They married in September of that same year in Venice, Italy. The ceremony was a multi-day celebration, attended by close friends and family, and it quickly became one of the most discussed weddings of that decade. The images that emerged from Venice showed two people who looked, by any reasonable measure, happy following the wedding. The couple divided their time between their home in England, the Lake Como villa in Italy, and a property in Los Angeles. Amal continued her legal career without interruption. She did not step back from her caseload or reduce her public advocacy work. In 2017, she and George became parents to twins, a son named Alexander and a daughter named Ella. Clooney has spoken openly about how fatherhood changed him in ways he had not anticipated, describing it as the most significant shift in his sense of self that he had ever experienced. The family has maintained a relatively private life given the level of fame involved, which appears to be a deliberate and shared choice. No public relationship of this scale goes entirely without scrutiny, and the Clooneys have not been an exception. Over the years, tabloid outlets have periodically published rumors of tension or difficulty, as they do with nearly every high-profile marriage. None of these reports have been substantiated, and neither George nor Amal has given them any public acknowledgement. What has been documented, however, is the genuine pressure that comes with Amal's work. Several of her cases have involved credible security concerns. In 2022, she was appointed as an independent expert for the United Nations Human Rights Council, tasked with investigating conditions in Belarus. These are not symbolic roles. They carry real weight and real risk, and managing that alongside family life and the constant visibility that comes with being married to one of Hollywood's most recognizable figures is a reality that most people will never fully appreciate from the outside. Clooney, for his part, has stepped back from the most demanding aspects of his acting career in recent years, focusing more on producing and directing, which appears to afford the couple more stability in their day-to-day lives. As of today, Amal Clooney remains one of the most respected international human rights lawyers in the world. She continues her work at Doty Street Chambers and takes on cases that carry genuine global significance. In 2024, she was part of the legal team advising the International Criminal Court in proceedings related to the conflict in Gaza, a role that placed her at the center of one of the most closely watched legal and humanitarian debates of the current era. She and George remain married. They are raising their twins, who are now school-aged, largely out of the public eye. When Amal does appear publicly, it is almost always in the context of her legal work, or in support of causes she cares about, not for the purposes of maintaining a celebrity profile. She gives measured, thoughtful interviews. She dresses impeccably and carries herself with the kind of quiet confidence that suggests someone who has never needed external validation to feel grounded. George Clooney still speaks about her with what can only be described as genuine admiration. In interviews, he consistently returns to the same theme, that he was lucky and that he knows it. There is something worth sitting with in this story. We live in a culture that tends to celebrate fame as the highest form of achievement, and yet the relationship that most completely changed one of Hollywood's most famous men was built not on shared celebrity, but on something quieter, mutual respect, intellectual engagement, and the kind of admiration that has nothing to do with a camera or an audience. Amal Clooney did not become George Clooney's wife and lose herself in the process. She remained exactly who she was, and that perhaps more than anything else is what made her remarkable to him and to the rest of the world watching from a distance. Celebrity marriages are often treated as entertainment. They are analyzed, predicted, and mourned when they end. But some of them are simply two people building a life together as thoughtfully as they can, in circumstances most of us will never fully understand. So here is something worth thinking about. What does it say about our cultural values that a woman with Amal's career and accomplishments was primarily introduced to the world through her husband's name? And 10 years on, do you believe that a relationship between a very famous person and a very private person can truly remain balanced over time? Leave your thoughts below.